Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Cynthia Dickstein. Today we'll be discussing energy demands and their impact on a sustainable world. We are very pleased and privileged to have with us for this discussion Dr. Elisabeth Drake from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. Drake has a Doctor of Science in Chemical Engineering from MIT and began her career as a consultant at Arthur D. Little, where she became a VP of their Technological Risk Management practice. She has served as chair of the Chemical Engineering Department at Northeastern University, Associate Director for New Energy Technologies of the MIT Energy Lab, and in retirement continues to teach a graduate course at MIT on sustainable energy. Liz, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Can you talk a little bit more about your background, the early beginnings of your work in this field?
Well, I started out as a chemical engineer, and I got a job in this consulting company, Arthur D. Little, and I started working in cryogenic engineering, which is low temperature engineering, and by chance got assigned to do some work on some of the early experiments with the Saturn rocket, which was liquid hydrogen fired, and so I worked on some of the cryogenic low temperature problems associated with that. And later on, that experience led me into some consulting on liquefied natural gas, which is basically taking natural gas and cooling it to 260 degrees below zero, and it turns into a liquid, and that makes it you can transport it and so forth. So that technology was something that was starting to be used in the 70s, and I did a lot of consulting for companies that were putting in facilities of that sort. And the question of safety came up, so then I got interested in risk management, and I've done a lot of work on the management of materials that are very hazardous, but that we use in our society, and we need to use them responsibly, and a lot of them have to do with the petrochemical industry and the chemical industry. More recently, I've turned my interest, particularly after joining MIT in the energy field, to concerns about how our energy use is going to need to change in the future if we're going to be able to have a sustainable planet.
What are the main contributing factors to our demand, our great demand for energy?
Well, one of the things is that we have a lot more people, and each one of us uses more energy than we used to. It amazes me that when I was born, there were 2 billion people on this planet. And in my lifetime, there are over 6 billion. So where there was one person standing when I was born, there are now 3 of us. And we all are living a more industrialized lifestyle in countries like the US, where we use more and more energy. And countries like China, that have a low standard of living, their population are becoming aware of the way we live and how we use energy, and so their energy use is going up tremendously.
Mm-hmm. And affordable energy is tied into economic growth, isn't that correct? So that the demands are good for the economy in a perverse way.
Well, having affordable energy has really fueled our industrial growth. From the Industrial Revolution to today, we have global commerce, and you look at where the products we use every day come from, and they're from all over the world. We get fruit shipped halfway around the globe, so that we can have things when it's not their normal season. And that's because the transportation energy is so inexpensive that we can afford to do that.
But most of our energy today comes from, as we all know, fossil fuels.
That's correct.
Okay, and that creates a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Well, there are a couple of problems with fossil fuels, and I think the one that has concerned me the most, and I think is not really that high on the radar screen, is the problem of possible climate change. And I think today there's more and more evidence as time goes on that our climate is changing and that this is a serious concern. When you burn a fossil fuel, you generate carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. It goes up in the atmosphere, and it acts like a greenhouse, and it causes general warming of the planet. And with that warming comes perhaps more storms and shifts in climate locally and globally. I'm sure everybody's heard about the melting of glaciers and the ice caps and things of this sort. So these are effects that are serious, and they're pretty directly tied to fossil energy, although to some other things as well. There's some agricultural practices that come in there. But that's a serious impact. The other things that people are concerned about is depletion of oil, and then also the security. Energy security is another big issue.
And what about the fact that this creates instability between the rich and the poor?
Well, that's a big one. And if you look at the United States, we have about 5% of the world's population, and we have about over a third of the world's GDP. You know, that's pretty amazing. And we use about 25% of the world's energy. So we're big consumers, and we have a major economy. And there are a lot of people around the world who don't have access to energy at all. There are about 2 billion people on this planet who are living with income equivalents of less than $1 a day, and many of them don't have access to electricity, so they can't have even basic services of having light for educating students or refrigeration for medical supplies. So there's a huge disparity, and there are a lot of people who are starving on this planet, and we don't see them, so we don't think much about them, but they are there, and they are going to want their share, and that's going to be a political instability.
Sure. Now, in a paper that you wrote and were kind enough to share with me, you mentioned the fact that in this era of global urbanization, we have needs for large-scale sources of energy. Can you educate us about the difference between large-scale, large concentrated sources and large diffuse sources?
Well,
this was news to me when I read your...
Okay. We have been fortunate with fossil fuels that we had a very convenient large-scale source of energy. If you look at the amount of energy that's in an oil well or a coal mine, it's huge quantities. And we can take those and put them into a power plant or into engines and use that energy on almost any scale that we want. Nuclear energy is also similar to that. It's a large-scale source of energy, and these plants are built to serve 1,000-megawatt plants and things of this sort. So they can provide the electricity and the energy for a major city. If you take something like the renewable energy that we talk about, wind and solar and even hydro, these are derived from the energy that comes from the sun and falls on the earth. And that's very diffuse. There's a huge amount of it, but it's really spread out. And so if you look at supplying a big city using solar energy, there are a couple of problems. The first is that you need a very large area to collect the energy. And here in Arizona, where sunlight is very strong and there aren't a lot of days where it rains or is cloudy, the quality of solar energy that you can collect is pretty substantial, and it can be used much more efficiently than in Boston, where I come from, where it's cold and rainy, and a lot of the time our solar energy is much lower quality than what you have here. So you could talk about putting a huge installation in the desert in Arizona, collecting the energy and then feeding it somewhere else, but then you have the other problem of it's not continuous, and the way we use energy is a lot of it is sort of base load, they call it in the business, that we use energy sort of continuously, and then there are peaks and valleys. So on a hot summer day, the air conditioning load may peak the energy, and then solar energy is a nice thing to have. But in the Northeast, where I am, the peaks in the wintertime are for heating. And solar energy is not very good in the wintertime. So these things have to be matched, and the fact that it's a fluctuating energy makes it less easy to use. So if you start talking about having solar energy as a component of an energy system, then it's quite feasible. And I think that you'll see renewables coming in to maybe 10% or 15% of our energy supply over time.
Why do you think, I mean, of all places, as you just said, Arizona is the perfect place to at least begin or have a prototype or something. Why do you think this hasn't happened?
Oh, it is happening.
Oh.
There are projects in Arizona, and people are looking at concentrating solar power, and there's quite a bit of activity. If anybody's interested in learning more about it, go to the Department of Energy and look at their National Renewable Energy Lab website, and you can find a lot about different renewable energy projects all over the country. So they're starting, but it isn't anything that it's more expensive than a power plant, and so it's really having to be funded by the government, pretty much subsidized at this point in time, to be quite feasible.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind then is that there's a lack of political will, because we know we've had this problem for decades. And so when I say why is it not, I mean, I'm happy to hear that it is happening, but I'm not happy that it hasn't happened already when we had so much advance notice, and we could have put some resources into renewable energy, certainly solar, out here, for example.
Well, there are a lot of priorities, and politicians not unreasonably pick things that they think their constituents are interested in. And I think back to the early days of the Clinton administration, when an energy tax was proposed that was a few cents a gallon on gasoline, and that was a political disaster. Everybody was up in arms. How can they do this, and what crazy stuff is that? And yet, when supply and demand raise gasoline prices by $1 a gallon, we don't like it, we grumble, but we pay it. So we're very inconsistent in how we send messages to our politicians, and I think it's very important to have an educated public who knows what the issues are, so that they can get leaders who cannot fool them. If we want to do something about greenhouse gases and change our energy use, it's not going to be free. If it was free, we would be doing it already.
What do you think about the recent push for a resurgence of nuclear energy?
Well, I think if we really want to do something about greenhouse gas emissions, nuclear is one way of producing energy that doesn't have the greenhouse problems. But nuclear has its own baggage. And I think nuclear, in a serious response, there will be more nuclear. But we have a lot of problems with the fuel cycle and issues of proliferation and other things in the nuclear industry. So there's no easy answer to any of this, and we're going to have to make some difficult decisions, and in order to make them properly, we're going to have to know what we're talking about.
What about, just to go on the nuclear a little bit, I mean, if when you talk about political will, nobody wants the nuclear waste in their backyard. So we can't even agree on Yucca Mountain as a disposal site. So what are we going to do with all the nuclear waste if nobody wants it to store?
Well, first of all, nuclear waste is pretty compact. So it isn't like there are huge amounts of it. And it's really become a political issue that has been mishandled, and I think there always is, in any energy project, you have this thing that people call NIMBY, not in my backyard. So anything, whether it's liquefied natural gas, or it's a coal plant, or a nuclear plant, or nuclear waste, people don't want it. Put it somewhere else.
We saw that in the case of wind on Cape Cod.
Yeah.
Recently, right, in your backyard? Not
Yeah.
not exactly your backyard.
Well,
but
it is my backyard, and we get the Cape Wind people to come in and talk to our class at MIT, and they have a project that makes an awful lot of sense, and from environmental point of view, it's excellent, and you know it does create a few little toothpicks on the horizon that impact the view of some very wealthy people, and so. You know.
Okay. Well, what do you think then, since there are problems with all these alternative energy sources? I mean, some of them are very expensive, some of them not in our backyard. What's the most important thing that needs to be done to combat global warming?
Well, we have to reduce our energy use, I think. And as prices of energy go up, we tend to use it more conservatively. But I think we have to do something more proactive. And the problem is that energy is embedded in everything we use. When we buy, you know, sneakers that are made in Asia and have been shipped across the ocean, we don't think about it. And the people who are doing that are big companies. And I've seen recently that Walmart is starting to talk about going greener. And so I hope that some of the big corporations will start doing this. And I think if they start doing it, then perhaps the politicians may be a little bit less afraid to speak up. But some politicians are totally unwilling to even think about this issue. And others, I think, are more open. And we have to make sure that we get people that will advocate properly in office.
That brings me to ask you, do you think up to now that politicians have been part of the problem or the solution? Or could they work successfully for the solution?
I think politicians are so tied up with the economy that when you have to make a change that has a negative impact, even if it's a small impact on the economy, they're very, very hesitant to do anything. And politicians have a time horizon of a few years because they're always looking toward the next election. So if it's a problem that's going to have a negative effect in the near future for long-term good, they're not interested in it. They're interested in something that will make them look good right now.
Sure. Is the world's present economic growth sustainable? It's a big question.
Well, I think economic growth is sustainable, but not in the way that we're doing it. And I don't think it's really, you know, this is huge social and political philosophy question that I'm just an engineer. But it seems to me that that we've gotten to be a very selfish society, and we don't worry about other people who have problems. And so being a better world citizen and actually perhaps not being quite so greedy ourselves and being willing to pay taxes for good purposes that will make the whole world a better place, I think is a good thing. That would be my hope.
It's interesting. I read statistics all the time, and Americans kind of pat themselves on the back that we're such a generous nation, and yet our per capita foreign aid is much smaller than other countries. I mean, we have individual donors who give, but and I think it's what you were saying. We don't have this bigger picture as world citizens. You know, we're struggling here, and capitalism is a system that makes us work as hard as we can for our own individual benefit, and doesn't really talk that much about helping other people.
Well, I think sometimes that I'm part of this mentality we have that's encouraged by television and advertising of being addicted to acquiring stuff. And we have so much stuff, and it's all breaking, and we have to have it repaired, you know. And I think if I had less stuff, my life would be a lot easier. Oh,
absolutely. I agree with you. And I think things are actually, not to be so cynical, but built to break. Because I remember when I was younger, they lasted much longer. And that also takes up more energy when you're manufacturing repeatedly the same items because their
Surely.
shelf life or their lifespan is much smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Back to this economic growth a little bit. How do nations, in order to save energy, or how do nations put the brakes on their economic growth? How do you ask a nation to do that?
Well, a couple of countries are trying to do that. The British put out an energy plan where they actually said something, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's like they were going to cut their economic growth by about 0.5% a year, and they were going to invest that money in changing their energy structure to something that's more sustainable. Mm-hmm. Now, how they do that and whether they actually do it, but they're starting to look at wind farms, and they're getting some political opposition, just like we had in Cape Cod. But it's on their radar screen. Mm-hmm. And actually, the Chinese, in their 5-year plan, have some words in there about slowing economic growth a bit to make sure that as the infrastructure is put in, and they're putting in their infrastructure now, mm-hmm. that it's done efficiently and cleanly.
Mm-hmm. Who do you suppose is behind these initiatives? I mean, are we talking about elected officials or corporate leaders or academics or the citizenry? I mean, what is the motivating factor or voting bloc? Or
I don't think any one of us can do the change alone. We have a global community. We have to work both locally and in our own lives to make change. We have to make sure that we have people in office who are going to be good representatives. We have to be selective consumers, so that just because our neighbor has a humongous SUV, we don't have to go out and buy a stretch Hummer. Mm-hmm. You know, it's all things, and then eventually the manufacturers will start making products that are more saleable to a knowledgeable populace.
Mm-hmm. So you think that we, the consumer, have a good amount of power then?
Oh, we do.
Mm-hmm. But somebody needs to harness that power or motivate us, because we haven't had the proper motivation. I mean, we lost a great opportunity after 9/11 when we could have, when the whole country was united, and we could have probably made sacrifices.
But we're bombarded with the other direction. I turn on the television, and there are ads after mm-hmm. ads of things that I need to have and need to go and travel and buy this house and
mm-hmm. and how. But what I've noticed is it's not just that we think we need it. I mean, that they're using fear, putting aside 9/11 mm-hmm. and the political use of fear. But I think manufacturers or advertising has always used fear. I mean, the old "I've fallen and I can't get up," so you mm-hmm. need one of those. You need a cell phone to reach your children, and it's a combination of, we think we need things to make us happy, and then we think we need things to make us safe. So how do we then fight this huge movement, this advertising behemoth that's out there bombarding us all the time?
Well, I've come to the conclusion that things are not going to make me either happy or safe if I'm not happy and in a setting where I feel safe. So things aren't going to do it.
I don't want to personally offend you, because I'm going to put myself mm-hmm. in the same category. I think part of that has to do with our age.
Oh, yeah.
If we were 16, 18, 25 years old, that age group is much more apt to buy into, pardon the pun, the fact that you need to buy a lot of things for happiness. At our point, we have a shift in what we understand makes us happy.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that means we have more power because the demographics are such that the baby boomers are now becoming a larger group. But
I find that there are a lot of young people who I meet in schools who are willing to listen and who are willing to think about our energy footprint. Mm-hmm. And I've had students who say, I usually ask them, what is your footprint today? Well, as a graduate student, you're not using too much energy. But they say, now, imagine you're at the height of your career, how much, this has to do what car you're going to have and so forth. And a lot of them say that they're not going to do that. But they're people who know what the situation is.
So I take it you're very hopeful.
I'm not very hopeful, but I think that it's like the 1,000 points of light from the Tales of Narnia. We each have to do a little something and keep talking about it. And so, I'm an old lady, but I'm willing to talk about it.
So, therefore, is that how you define or minimize your footprint? Is that one of the things, besides needing fewer things, you're talking about it and making a contribution and using less energy?
Well, I just moved, and I downsized my living space by a factor of 3. And I got rid of an awful lot of stuff, which I gave away and recycled and did what I could.
So if we all did that, I mean, it sounds like you think that's the answer, that we all need to...
It's part of it, but if we stop buying things, the economy's going to fail.
That was my next point. So what do we do? I mean, is there a solution for the world?
I think the solution is that we're not going to change things very much because we are so focused on the economy. And we're going to get into some kind of an economic crisis. There's a very interesting book that was written in the 70s that basically predicted that there would be a major crash. It's called Limits to Growth. And it was written by Jay Forrester and a couple of his students. And he said that there are limits, and we're going to hit them, and we may hit them around 2050. And
so, very quickly,
yeah.
Each of us should minimize our footprint as best we can. Is that that's the answer?
Yep. Go for a walk instead of driving.
Okay. Liz Drake, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a really interesting and enlightening conversation.
Thank you. It was very interesting for me, too.
And thank you to everyone. And I'd like to leave you with our customary quote that we do each show, and it is by M. King Hubbard, the geophysicist, who stated in 1969 that it is evident that the fortunes of the world's human population, for better or for worse, are inextricably interrelated with the use that is made of energy resources. Thank you.
That's great.
That was really great.